Hey, what's going on, everyone? Today we're talking about something that so many of us have been waiting to hear about, and that's the brand new update for Hollow Knight Silksong, the second major post-launch patch that Team Cherry has put out. Now, if you've been playing the game since release, or maybe you just picked it up recently and you've been making your way through the kingdoms, chances are you've run into some weird bugs, maybe a few fights that didn't quite work the way they were supposed to, or even some little details that felt off. Well, this patch is all about smoothing those things out, fixing some long-standing issues, and just making the overall experience cleaner, more stable, and honestly a little more polished for all of us who are spending way too many hours in this beautiful but punishing world. So let's talk through everything that's changed, every fix, and why it matters when you're actually playing the game. And trust me, there's a lot to unpack here, so settle in because I'm going to go through all of it in detail. First off, one of the headline changes that you'll probably notice right away if you mess around in the settings is the addition of a dithering effect option in the advanced video settings. Now, for people who don't usually poke around with this kind of thing, dithering is basically a way of reducing color banding on your screen. You know those moments where you see a gradient, maybe a shadowy background or a foggy area, and instead of looking smooth, it looks kind of like steps of color? That's color banding, and dithering helps make that look more natural. But here's the catch. When you turn dithering on, it can sometimes soften the foreground visuals just a little, which means your character or enemies might not look quite as sharp as you're used to. By default, Team Cherry has it set to off, but the fact that you can toggle it now gives you control over whether you'd rather have those smoother gradients or sharper edges. It's a small thing, but in a game that's all about atmosphere, shadows, light, and really gorgeous hand-drawn art, it makes a difference. I think a lot of players will just leave it off, but if you're the kind of person who notices little visual quirks, this is going to be a welcome addition. Now, moving past visuals, one of the really nice quality of life fixes they made is to the Herald's Wish achievement. Before this patch, the description of that achievement was a little vague and had players confused. People were completing the wish, but not getting the achievement and wondering what they missed. With the update, Team Cherry has clarified it so that now the description makes it clear you need to not only complete the wish, but also finish the game itself. That's the kind of small communication fix that honestly saves hours of frustration and Googling. And I appreciate when devs go back and smooth that kind of thing out because it respects our time as players. All right, now let's get into some of the juicier bug fixes because this patch is filled with them. And when I say bug fixes, I'm not just talking about random little text typos. I mean enemies getting stuck, bosses leaving the arena, and situations that could completely mess up a fight. For example, there was an issue with the savage beastfly in Farfields where sometimes it would end up below the lava. Can you imagine that? You're in the middle of this fight, adrenaline pumping, you're dodging attacks, and suddenly the enemy just disappears into the lava. Completely breaks the flow. That's fixed now, so no more awkward waiting or restarting because the enemy decided to take a bath in molten death. Same goes for Shrine Guardian. Same goes for Shrine Guardian Seth. This is one of those fights that already tests your patience, but occasionally Seth would just end up out of bounds, literally outside the area he's supposed to be in. Nothing kills the intensity of a boss fight faster than realizing your opponent is stuck somewhere off screen where you can't hit them. That's patched up now, so when you square off with him, you're actually fighting the fight the way it was intended. And speaking of fights breaking, Lugoli had a hilarious but frustrating bug where it would sometimes just fly off screen and not come back. Imagine being in the middle of that encounter and suddenly your enemy just says, "Nope, I'm done," and takes off into the void. You're stuck standing there with your weapon ready and the arena's empty. Yeah, that's gone now. Lugoli will stick around and actually finish the fight with you. Another boss fight that saw improvements was the Chapel of the Reaper encounter, where Silk Snippers could get stuck out of bounds. These little guys are supposed to add chaos and difficulty to the battle, but instead they just vanish somewhere they weren't supposed to. It kind of made the fight inconsistent, sometimes way easier than it should have been, sometimes just confusing. Now they're properly contained and the fight plays out the way it was designed. But it's not just enemies going missing or wandering off. The patch also addressed a handful of softlocks, which if you've ever run into one, you know how annoying they are. A softlock is basically when the game doesn't crash, but you get stuck in a situation where you can't progress and you have to restart. One example that got fixed was with the shaman binding. If you used it and transitioned into a bottom area, you could get stuck. That's the kind of thing that ruins runs, especially if you're doing a challenge or a binding playthrough. So having that fixed is a huge relief. Another really practical fix is cocoons no longer spawning in areas where you can't reach them. This one's just about fairness. Imagine knowing there's a cocoon right there, something you could use, but it's in an inaccessible spot and the game just taunts you with it. That's fixed, and now cocoons will only appear where you can actually interact with them. For those of you who like playing Steel Soul mode, there was a frustrating bug where the liquid lacquer courier delivery wasn't accessible. That kind of breaks the whole flow of Steel Soul, where every resource and delivery is critical. Thankfully, that's been fixed, so you can actually get what you need when you're on that one life run. NPC interactions also got some love in this patch. Some characters were skipping their cursed hint dialogue depending on what conditions you triggered. That robbed a bit of flavor from their personalities, and if you're someone who loves the lore and dialogue in Silksong, you know how important those lines can be. That's patched up, so conversations should play out as intended. And while we're on NPCs, there was also a bug with the pondcatcher reed where after it sang, it wasn't able to fly away like it was supposed to. Small detail, but it matters for keeping the world alive and behaving in ways that feel believable. Now let's talk about memory orbs, specifically the Verdania ones. Before, they sometimes replayed the visual burst effects over and over, even when they weren't supposed to. It was distracting and broke immersion, so Team Cherry cleaned that up. It's another example of polishing the small things that add up to a smoother play experience. And then we've got fixes to some of the tools and skills. The break counter wasn't working right on certain multi-hitter tools like the conch cutter. For people who rely on break mechanics, this was really frustrating because it meant your tools weren't performing the way you expected. That's corrected now, so the counter actually responds properly. Similarly, the volt filament damage multiplier wasn't being applied to certain silk skills. That's the kind of bug that can make builds feel underpowered or inconsistent. With the fix, your skills should hit the way they're supposed to, and builds that rely on volt filament will feel more reliable. Companions also had their share of problems, like cogflies and wisps targeting skull wings incorrectly. They were supposed to help you out, not attack the wrong things. That's been corrected, and while they were added, Team Cherry also fixed cogflies resetting to full health when you move between scenes, which could make fights feel off. Those companions now behave the way they were originally intended. There were also some tweaks to items like the curve claw, which was breaking on the very first hit after being deflected. Totally not how it was supposed to function, but now it works properly. And consumables like plasmium file and flea brew sometimes weren't restoring correctly at benches. Nothing more frustrating than sitting down at a bench thinking you're stocked up only to realize the game didn't refill you. Thankfully, that's patched and you can actually trust your resources again. So overall, what does all of this mean? Well, the big takeaway is that this patch is not about radically changing the balance of the game or reworking bosses. It's about fixing what was broken, addressing inconsistencies, and making the whole experience smoother. If you're the kind of player who's been deep into the game since launch, you've probably already seen a bunch of these issues firsthand, so this update is going to make your next run feel a lot less frustrating. If you're newer, it means you'll just never encounter those problems, and you'll get a more polished experience right out of the gate. It's also worth pointing out that right now, the update is in the public beta branch on PC through Steam. So if you're on PC and you want to test it out early, you can opt into the beta and play around with all of these fixes right now. For console players, including those on Switch, the update will roll out a little later, once it's been fully tested and finalized. That's usually how these things go, but it's good to know that Team Cherry is making sure the fixes are solid before pushing them across every platform.